welcome to those who are joining us. We've realized that our video clip was longer than half an hour. It was actually about 44, 45 minutes. So if you've joined us, a warm welcome to you. We are in conversation. The Reverend Dr. Lindsay Armstrong is our guest. For her, it's 5:30 or almost 6 now in the morning. And so it's a particular offering for her to be here. But if you'd like to ask a question, you just raise your hand using the responses at the bottom of the screen, or if I can see you and you raise your hand in your screen, then I'll slot you in to ask a question. We've had a couple of questions already. Is there anybody who wants to take us a bit further? Yes, Douglas, go ahead. Unmute.
Hello, Dr. Armstrong. How are you? Thank you for an amazing talk. It really was challenging and encouraging. I liked what you said about us moving away from the institutionalized church, because that's something I'm very passionate about in terms of ecclesiology. What I wanted to ask was, in my congregation, we are a majority older white members. We are starting to get younger members to come in of various backgrounds and races. But we still find that what we need to do to bring church change in the church, it's coming slowly, but we still find our older members still are quite resistant. I use an example, and the question is, how do we overcome it? But I'll use the example very quickly. We run before COVID, once a quarter, we ran a family service. And when we do that as part of our holiday clubs and outreaches, we did a song that the kids know quite well from Hillsong called Jesus is My Superhero, which the kids love. They get up, they sing, they worship. My section clerk came up to me and said, "You can't put that on the screen again. Jesus is not a superhero," and got quite irate about us using this kind of medium. How do we sensitively, lovingly, carefully, slowly begin to change that mindset? Because for a lot of our churches, and I'm lucky in the sense that Trinity is a church that loves the gospel, so in many other areas there, God has been very gracious to us, but I'm just wondering, how do we move them from here to there in a sensitive and compassionate way, if I'm making sense?
Yeah, that is a tricky one, because in so many of our churches, there is a great deal of nervousness about whether we will grow, where we will be in a generation or two, whether we will still survive. And not just nervousness, sometimes people have decided in their minds, or they're scared to admit that they may have, and they're grieving already, or they're at least grieving the lack of strength and vitality that they can imagine and wish for and dream. And so this is such a tender moment and such a difficult time. I think the fact that the way that you're already asking the question speaks highly and is so important. I really enjoy finding out from people and cultivating conversations where they connect with what is deeply important to them on the inside, so that you can get a sense of why we are doing church in a certain way. And if I don't pretend to know the call of your particular church or any of your churches, I mean, the vocation, we all have the same call in some ways.
Yes.
But if your community, and I don't think this is an easy conversation, I don't think it just pops off the screen all the time, especially for those of us leading churches who have been around for a little bit. Sometimes you have to rediscover a new chapter of call, of what you do and why. But once you're really clear on the why you're doing church, then the way it happens, I mean, we do this, fill in the blank, so that this will happen, fill in the blank. And if your community's call, for example, has something to do with, and I don't pretend to know, but if you all are perhaps in a church where the call really is to neighbor and to really build a stable, geographically based sense of intimate and unique, otherwise bringing relationships and people together that were otherwise estranged in a one particular area that is distinct. I mean, it can't be too big. Churches aren't for everyone. Church is for everyone, but one particular church is not for the entire universe. Then building those relationships, a lot of what you would do and why we do this, so that it pivots around that idea of neighboring deeply. Now, I don't pretend to know your church's vocation, but if the folks can be gently moved away from the conversation about what you do to the why, then a conversation about, okay, is Jesus is my superhero song a good way to accomplish our purpose, becomes a different kind of conversation. It's not so much about whether we're going to portray Jesus, with a cape on, or the Incredibles version without a cape on, but as a superhero. It's more about what's happening in the moment when we sing the song. Is what we feel called as a church to do actually not being accomplished, because that'll never be fully realized in any one moment, but are we getting closer with this activity? We do this, fill in the blank. I mean, this is a great leader. I do this with my leaders all the time. We do this so that this will happen. And it's being so mindful that God doesn't just love the church, but God has given us the church as an instrument of God's own love. And that kind of energy, rerouted, becomes less about, the color of the carpet in the sanctuary and the kinds of songs we sing, because then the mission is front and center. Is that okay? You're nodding your head. Okay. And for any of you, if you want to talk offline, we can. This is a brief moment that we have.
That's
I'm just
perfect.
delighted to meet you all.
And that's perfect, Lindsay, because we've already created a 5-year plan for turning it around. But this just ties in with what I was asking. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Armstrong. I really appreciate this.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, Lindsay. Just want to make sure we stick to time, and we're going to go over a little bit because some of our folks have only recently joined us. But two things. Firstly, can I ask Lindsay to just mention the second shift? We've spoken about the move away from demand to meaning, but just mention the second one, and then Royden is next to ask his question.
Sure. A second shift that I am seeing time and time again in the churches around, well, actually, I did this as a nationwide study, but I didn't get much beyond, though I'd love to come visit you all. Second shift, it's a move from hierarchical to participatory decision-making. Now, I need to be clear that when I say any of these shifts, we're never fully leaving one behind in favor of the other. It's more of an emphasis kind of a thing. But in the age of institutions, the church, business, education, everybody simply made decisions based on hierarchy, and there was a centralized decision-making body more often than not. Now, with access, everybody expects to have a voice and a view. And so decentralized participatory decision-making, mass collaboration, this opportunity brings more people to the table, empowers them, helps them find their voice, be more invested, and often comes up with better ideas.
Royden?
Thank you so much, George. Lindsay, my question comes from watching a particular large church that's here in South Africa by the name of Rhema, and having chances over the years to be able to sit with their lead pastor, Ray McCauley. They in the 70s wanted to break away from what was regarded as the institutionalized church, and to, in a sense, reinvent themselves. Years later, when I was sitting with him having a conversation, asking him, Ray, so how's it going? And his one comment really blew me away, where he said, we moved away from the institutionalized church, and we found that we have become the institutionalized church.
Yeah.
And he said that they found that as probably the largest church in South Africa, that they couldn't escape this type of gravitational pull, that you become exactly what you moved away from. Your thoughts on that as we try to break away from certain institutionalized ways of doing church, that we can have a tendency to move right back into that again?
Yes. Yeah. And I appreciate all of your questions. I really do. Thank you. And Royden, thank you for that one as well. Yeah. By saying we were once in an age of institutions, and now there's a lot of ways to describe the current era. I'm not trying to be definitive or speak in totalities. This is just one important descriptor. By saying now we're in an age of access, what I mean by that, we're never going to leave behind institutions, and I'm thankful for that. Institutions provide grounding, they provide foundation, they provide stability, they provide history. There's a lot going for institutions. The ways institutions function will continue to evolve and change. But what I mean by moving from the age of institutions to the age of access is simply that it is the case that once institutions really were one of the more powerful players in society. They shaped and had more power than so many other things. Now, access is challenging. I mean, access is shaping, I think, church, but also business and so many other factors, pieces of society, in ways that even the institutions are scrambling to catch up with. And so, yes, I quite agree. And to be honest, you have to continue organizing in ways that work. So we will always have institutions. We are an institution. However, just because we exist does not mean we have the power anymore. And by the power, I mean just the ability to convene, the ability to connect, the ability to provide so much meaning and stability in people's lives. God still works powerfully through the church to do all these things, but not only through the church in quite the same way that we once imagined. That might have been a myth even then. But yeah, I'm not surprised to hear your friend's comment, Royden. We can say we want to do it all differently, and I can point to a handful of churches right here who started as new churches because they wanted to do church differently, and now they look very much like the church that they left. To me, I'm not surprised. That's normal. We have to organize. And also not really the point, because they are doing fantastic ministry in Christ's name that is really changing lives. And so if they have been able to bring more people in, more power to them. God bless them. But yes, that's all I meant by age of institutions is past. The age where the institution ran supreme. Everybody wanted to function in that kind of way, in that hierarchy, that kind of a thing. It will still be a part of us for a long time to come, I have no doubt. And I'm thankful for it. It brings gifts too.
Good.
Thanks
Kevin
so much,
Best
Lindsay.
is
Thank
next, and then Pulukutsile. I can see your hands, gentlemen. And when I put them down, I have noted them, and I will schedule you in. So Kevin is first, Pulukutsile is second. Carry on.
Thank you, Lindsay, for sharing your amazing insights and visionary perspective. Are you hearing me okay?
I am. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it.
This whole question of the age of access. I've been in the IT industry in corporate and institutional organizations for many years, so I have a great awareness of the power of access and what the digital age has brought to us. I'm also very aware of the downside of it in terms of its impact on our humanity, our social skills, and the power of it to actually dumb us down as people, as communities. So I appreciate the points you've made about how it's kind of pushing us into a new era of exploring community and being willing to engage in ways we've not done in the past. if I can, I don't know if I can, George, share a screen. I'm going to try. But this, now, would you mind giving me the function to share a screen, George? I've just got one picture that came up on my Facebook, and I thought, no, this speaks to the problem if I can share it.
You try now.
Great. Can you see this one? You got that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. And that hits the nail on the head. One of our local community, and I responded yes, and add church to that. And the title over this, yeah, isn't this scary? And I agreed, particularly when we add church into that as well. And this is my concern. Let me stop sharing that and get back to you. But so for all the value there is in our accessibility to one another over digital communication and so on, and I mean what we're doing now is evidence of the positive power of it. What I saw in my experience over decades is that the dumbing down of our, as I say, our humanity, our ability to face one another face to face. It's a lot easier to do it when we can pick and choose who we want to talk to through digital communication, whatever, virtual, and we create virtual lives around ourselves based on our virtual interfaces. But we become stupid and disabled in the real world. And I'm just wondering if we go down this route, we are taking on more and more of the world. I understand, as I say, the positive aspects of this, but I wonder where the line is. And you've given us some good insight on how to ensure that we still do engage with community on the ground in the way the community needs to hear from the church. But you see my concern about this age of access, as you put it.
I do. Yeah, and I also hear in that distinctive call that you may have, Kevin. I mean, your particular insight into this problem and your deep passion for it often, I mean, I nice to meet you. We've known each other for 10 seconds now. How would I know what your deep call is? But in that concern that you have, I hear deep call that shapes how your ministry goes forward and who you are called to. And you're naming your why. And so, yes, we have great challenges in front of us. I do believe, especially because I am sitting here in the United States in the middle of a dramatic and really difficult election season, that we need to become remarkable, if we aren't already, at hearing each other's stories. Hearing each other's stories, the people we don't know or necessarily even want to know. Because quite frankly, sometimes when people do something that makes no sense to us or that makes us angry, it's not because they're ridiculous or dumb. It's because they see the world differently. They have different meaning. They have different stories behind them. And so, yes, this is one version of the call. I think, Kevin, that you are actually, I'll be curious to see, I would be very curious to know offline, of course, where your ministry takes you, because I hear a tremendous why that's already motivating perhaps some of what you go forth and do in your church and your ministry, and who you continue to minister with and build community with. Yeah. Access has gifts and downsides, no doubt. It really is a mixed bag, but we don't get to choose it, is the catch. We can either adapt to it or not, but it's here. Yeah.
Paula Kutsile, go ahead, and then Melanie Cook to follow.
Thank you, George, and good day, everyone. On the presentation, I captured the words decision making. That has to do with decentralizing the decision making part of the church. Now I'm struggling to strike in a balance between what we as the Presbyterian Church believe in, that we are a church that is governed by elders. That means decisions will be made by elders. And then here we are talking of decentralizing decision. In a township congregation where elders are so much, I would say, and feels entitled for them to make decisions, and that in itself works negatively so in as far as growth is concerned. So going forward, how does one try and do his best to strike a balance in between decentralizing decision making, whereby one will be trying to involve everybody within the church, and then us as a church that is being governed by elders? Thank you very much.
This is also a great question, and a tricky one. The beautiful thing is that there's no one right answer to this. And by adopting these postures, you can co-create it together. You can have a conversation and brainstorm it out. But I do want to make a few more tangible comments than that, because it is a tricky thing. We have a Presbyterian system of governance that isn't going anywhere. And I think it's worth holding on to. I really do. The job of leaders right now is shifting. And one of the many ways it is shifting, in my belief, is that we as leaders are called to sense the needs, the needs in the room. We're also called to hear the really good stuff, the great ideas, this piece from there, that piece from so-and-so, and to lift up the really remarkable stuff. And so as we function as pastors, as elders, as people, at least on a session, I do wonder if I have been a part of sessions where most decisions were made in one room around one table and the doors were closed. Now, never mind the fact that they got revisited in the parking lot afterwards when everybody wanted to, revisit the decision to be made. But if instead of, for the big things, I mean, you can't get mired down in little stuff. You just got to decide and move on. But for the big things, if instead we as leaders had a conversation, what does it mean that more people expect to be at the table right now and be a part of the decision-making involved in this? And what does it mean that that is an expectation? Having a conversation and letting the actual elders figure out the answer is a good idea. Also, the elders can be, in some ways, researchers, connectors, networkers, to go and actually not have closed conversations, because that can go sideways so many different, that can go bad. It can look like manipulation or whatever. But for big stuff, have venues where more people are invited to weigh in and weigh in with consequence. And figuring out what that looks like for your community is actually just part of the experimentation that's kind of a little bit fun that the church gets to do. There are people who often have better ideas than the session does, who are not on the session. Not always. Sometimes we got this, but not usually. And to be honest, the more we can figure out the appropriate ways, and you're asking what's appropriate, and it's a very contextual question. It's a great question, but I would take the posture, bring it up with your leaders and talk it through, and then look for opportunities as well to really bring more people to the table, whatever that may be. Sometimes it's, hey, you invite them to a session meeting. Other times it's, you get more feedback at a congregational or town hall meeting or a congregational conversation, and then the session goes back informed by everyone. It kind of depends on the level of what you're talking about. But yeah, I'm not voting that we get rid of our representational government. We get a lot done well that way. But at the same time, who actually gets voice and who we listen to, and young adults, if they have to wait 5 years before they get to be a leader, or 10 years until they get old enough, they're not going to be there. And that doesn't mean we need to make them leaders instantly. It does mean that if they don't find themselves being very useful right now, they'll go to a place that they are. And yet God brought them to your community for a reason, even if it was just once or twice. How can we tap in and welcome them and hear their voice? It's a question beautifully we can't answer right here, but your community can. You can sit down and have a conversation about it and say, here's the trick. What do we do? And that leads to dynamic answers for your particular community that'll work for your community.
Thank you, Lindsay. Melanie Cook with the last question for this morning.
Hi, George. Hi, Lindsay.
Hello.
I enjoyed your video so much, and I apologize for only coming through late. I was taking notes and stopping it. That's the wonderful thing about doing it on YouTube. I really just wanted, so first of all, to say that I'm a minister in a congregation. And my question really is, in an existing church like mine, who has been around for 50, 60 years, and has come from a long history and lots of tradition, and has come out of the era of what you call the institutional church, and what I think society viewed as the third place in their lives. So where everything, if you were not at work or you're not at home, you were at church doing whatever that was. Having come out of that, where the church is now not the third place for our younger generation, and still holding a fairly aged congregation that still sits in my church, who's obviously not really interested in kind of new things, and let alone kind of getting in touch with something that would be a need or an engagement for young people. Do I need to start again? Do I need to start a new church in order to do what you're kind of proposing? Do I need to start a new service? How do you begin to kind of blend the two? And I mean, is that possible? Have you seen that as, in your ministry and in your outreach things, the blending of those two, the older congregation and the possibility of attracting new people?
Yeah. What I have seen is, I have seen the blending of the two, but it is not the norm, because there are challenges that I'm sure you are already aware of and quite able to name. But it's also not the only exception to the rule. What I'm seeing is I have actually seen a number of very dynamic communities of only older people. Now, that might not be what anybody wants to hear, or it might be exactly what some people want to hear, because getting some older people together to talk about so this is our church right now, who we are. Why is God calling us into existence? What is our call right now? Not the call from 70 years ago or 50 years ago or even 20. Right now, who do we need to be? What are the needs in our own lives? What are the needs in people's lives that we know of that we that just break our hearts? What has God laid on our hearts in terms of concern for these people? And maybe it is friends like themselves who are older, who need a community for a third space or for whatever other reason. So we can brainstorm your question, but one thing I am seeing also are robust and dynamic groups of older people who, when freed from the need to become relevant to younger people, can then focus on a particular call that they feel passionate about, that they themselves, if they didn't have if they didn't have another 7 people join the church in the upcoming year, they would still feel great about being a church, because they know they are doing God's work in the world and they are following as well as they can. So this is not what you want to hear, Melanie, so I'm sorry to say this, but not all churches live forever, and actually just going robustly into the future and living with a particular purpose is so life-giving. Now, in terms of the blending and in terms of kind of a handing on, there is a handing on of the baton sort of a thing that takes a very brave and courageous congregation to do. If they can do that, I would really encourage the 6 postures that we're talking about here, bring those in and talk about, this is a scary conversation. I don't even know if we want to have it, but this is an opportunity to have a really important conversation, and we as Christians do hard things. So let's at least put this on the table, do some discernment work together, and figure out if we're being called to hand on to another group, and if so, what does this mean for us in a life-giving way, as well as for them? And if not, what does it mean for us? Because they may not be called to hand on, they may, but frankly, having the conversation about real meaning, they may not be able to create a third space for all generations like they once had. But what is the current call? That could be a really why. Start with that why. And that could be a really dynamic conversation for your community, because it could go any ways. Blend, hand on, yeah. Good luck. These are hard, fantastic questions. I'm enjoying this time with you all. Thank you.
Thank you for the great questions, everybody, and thank you for participating. We should really call it a close now, because there are other elements of the Inspire conference that are continuing. But can I invite you, especially tomorrow? We have a different time slot tomorrow, and it'll be more sort of luxurious for us because it's a full hour slot. 12 noon in South Africa. Lindsay, I'm sad to tell you, only 6 a.m. You can have a little lie-in for a half an hour tomorrow. But 6 a.m.
Oh, I thought I was at 5 a.m. Okay.
6 a.m. Atlanta time, 12 noon South African time. And we have a full hour tomorrow, but you watch your video at the normal time. That's at 11 o'clock. It's not quite as long as today's video clip. Lindsay and I are talking about the next 2 shifts that she has seen coming forward in the Missional Church. So watch that in advance at 11 o'clock, and then we will join together again at 12 noon. I think I'll open the meeting a quarter of an hour before that, and you're welcome to gather then. But thank you for participating, and we'll see you tomorrow.